Hello, everyone. I'm happy to see you. Thank you for coming, even in the rain. So we covered a lot of ground last time, and we did not get to the end of what I was anticipating us to get, but that's okay. So before we move forward, I thought we can share some thoughts, some questions, something learned that you heard, something that intrigued you, something that sparked something, a question that you kind of feel that is hanging. What went through your mind as we were discussing this joyous topic and the week that passed since last week to today? Right.
I can't remember if you told us, when you exactly told us this, but the 4 reasons for leaving, the 4 kinds of Jews.
The 4 reactions
Yeah, the 4
to
reactions.
the emancipation.
I had never heard it put together like that. And that just explains so much about us. So it just was like, oh, wow, that was my reaction.
Cool, thank you. What else?
Well,
Debbie? Okay.
I thought it was interesting. I hadn't heard before. I believe you said it was at the end of the French Revolution that Jews were first seen as a religion. And that was a new idea for me. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it.
Cool. Can people at home hear that, or I should repeat? Can you guys hear? No, okay. So one idea, thank you. One idea. So Bobby is saying the concept of the 4 reactions to the invitation to step out of the ghetto and kind of following the emancipation and to become just like everybody else. And Debbie is saying following that one of the reactions was that Judaism was now perceived as a religion. And she's sharing that she did not know or did not hear before that only following the French Revolution and the emancipation, for the first time really in history, Judaism was viewed as a religion and not as being part of particular people and everything that comes with that. Cool. What else?
Rabbi Ilana, could you briefly say what the 4 reactions are to the invitation to step out of the ghetto?
Absolutely. We'll do that in just a minute. Thank you.
Sure.
Len?
So I am intrigued by the extent to which anti-Semitism morphs from one generation to the next. The constant is the hatred, the rationale for it changes. I think that's very interesting.
Is it? No.
Well,
It is, I think it is that that the hatred remains, but the reason for it changes.
That's what they're saying.
It's
Okay.
like, isn't that interesting that they keep that up? But why? Well, that changes all the time.
Right. So we were talking about different forms of anti-Semitism, and Ilan is saying that he's intrigued about the fact that the hatred toward the Jewish people, we've seen it kind of across the generations and across centuries, and the why, or maybe even the how, kind of changes as life kind of progresses. And my hope today that we're going to get out of Europe and immigrate to the United States of America, and we're going to look into anti-Semitism here, and it will have another new form of that.
I have a question.
Please.
Hi, I'm Lori Boykoff. I'm in my jammies, and that's why I'm all blacked out. I thought, if I understood you correctly, you said something like when Jesus came onto the scene, and one of the reasons people were so drawn to him is because he said that Jews were behaving badly or something like that. I did not understand how they were behaving.
Yes, and I'm sorry that I did not get to answer your email because you did ask that question, so I apologize.
Okay.
And thank you for asking again. So at the time of Jesus, which is 2,000 years ago, the 1st century, there were different groups of Jewish people in the land of Israel, and they were really fighting one another. And one of the kind of reasons for why the big destruction happened by the Roman Empire and why the temple was destroyed is because of self-hatred. Between whom? Within us, between the different Jewish groups. And unfortunately, here we are 2000 years later, and I always like to view those four groups and kind of compare them to different Jewish groups around the world, but even more particularly inside of the state of Israel of today. And Jesus, as a Jewish leader, is looking at those various groups and is seeing that they're up to no good. And this is not a path that will lead to anything good. And that's why he's first telling them, you need to change your path. You need to change your behavior. You need to change this self-hatred and to shift it with love and kindness and just unity and bringing people together, because you're just fighting one another all day long. And unfortunately, 40 years after he said what he said, it was almost like a prophecy that came true. And Christianity that emerged out of that reality definitely sees his words as a prophecy that came true. And we see many different manifestations of that in history that kind of followed. Just as a quick example, the temple was standing on the Temple Mount, or Mount Moriah in Hebrew language, in Jerusalem. And that was the holiest place in the city. And for 600 years after the destruction of the temple, that mountain, which was a gigantic part of the city of Jerusalem, was not used by the Roman Empire, and even when the Roman Empire became Christian. So it stood empty in its destruction for 600 years until Islam kind of came to being, and then Muslims that conquered Jerusalem started utilizing the same mountain, and later on built on top of the same mountain the Golden Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And why wasn't it used? Because for the Romans, and definitely for the Romans that became Christians, the fact that the temple was destroyed was a prophecy that came true. And therefore, they did not want to use that holy site for anything, because for them, it was completely not important. So Jesus really, Yeshua, it's funny to talk about it and call him Jesus, but his Hebrew name, Yeshua, he's really tried to bring the Jewish people together and kind of to correct their path, their behavior path, in order to prevent the big catastrophe that unfortunately did happen about 40 years after he said that. So that was the intention. Lori, does it
Okay,
answer?
thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Shirley, yeah.
But, okay, Jesus said all these wonderful things, then he died. Then you're saying 40 years later.
But why did he die? What was the reason for that? So he first talked with the Jewish people and really kind of tried to do it in a peaceful way. When that kind of didn't help, he came all the way from the Galilee to Jerusalem. When he steps feet in Jerusalem, he's looking at the temple and he's again saying this out loud to whoever was there. And as the Torah and the Bible teaches multiple times, there is no prophet in its own city. And people never liked listening to prophecies that are not good. So they did not view him as a prophet, that's for sure. But they did view him as a person that is saying that their city will be destroyed. And he said that more than once. And they were not okay with that. So they're going to the Romans who were in charge and saying, you need to take care of this young fellow that is telling us that our city will be destroyed. And eventually that's what happens. He said those words in a big kind of central location on the Sunday. On the Thursday, after he celebrated Passover night with his students, he was arrested by the Romans. The following morning, on Friday morning, the Romans brought him into a trial in front of the Roman governor at that time, Pontius Pilate. And actually, Pontius Pilate, when he looked at him, he did not understand what has this person done wrong. And he's actually so confused that the New Testament is telling us that he's taking him to the street of the city of Jerusalem, and a lot of crowds were there. And he's asking everybody, Ecce homo in Latin, this is the person? Are you sure that this is the person that you want to punish? He didn't understand. And all the people, the Jewish people said, yes, we're sure. This is a person that is distracting our kind of everyday life and telling that our future is not good and that the city will be destroyed and we're going to lose our temple and all of that. This was the reason why he was punished. The punishment was death by crucifixion. By the way, this is the end of the Jewish story, meaning we as Jewish people accept everything that happened up until that point, including the punishment, the crucifixion, that happened on Friday afternoon, just before Shabbat. We even accept the burial piece. And when do we stand at the crossroad? On a Sunday morning. When the New Testament tells us that on a Sunday morning, the two Marys, his mother and Mary the Magdalene, are coming to visit the grave, which is a common thing to do in Jewish tradition, and the grave is empty, and there was an angel waiting for them, and the angel is telling them, do not look for him here because he have risen. This is the crossroad between Judaism and Christianity. We accepted everything that happened up until that moment. From that moment, Jewish people no longer accept everything that comes next. And later on, it will be formed into a new religion, which is Christianity, that was blaming a finger on Jews for 2,000 years for killing the Messiah.
But weren't the disciples that came after him after he died pretty shrewd to create this whole new religion?
It took
And
300
convince
years.
All these people.
But it took 300 years to form the religion as a religion. At the beginning, they were all Jews. The disciples were his students. They were his contemporaries. They were all Jews. There was nothing else. Well, or Romans who were pagans, but all of his followers were Jews. And they started believing that he is the Messiah. This is what is referred to as Messianic Jews. We have those around us until this very day. And it took 300 years until the Roman Empire kind of get to know the story and met with these groups of people and decided to create a formal religion out of this entire story and to convert the empire into this new accepted religion, which was Christianity. So many things have happened during that time. Other thoughts or questions that people are hanging with since last time? People at home? If you're not in your pajamas and you are able to have your camera on, we would love to see you. Any thoughts or questions before we move on? Romy, I remember your question. Okay, cool. So we ended up, we covered about 1800 years or more. So that's not little. Okay, and we got to the French Revolution, and we were saying that following Napoleon and the French Revolution, the concept of emancipation, for the first time in history, Jewish people were invited to live, quote unquote, their ghettos and to come and become really just like anybody else, like the French, like later on the Germans, the Italians, and so on and so forth. And then we ended up by saying that different groups of Jews gave different responses to this invitation to step out of the ghetto and become just like everybody else. I'm just repeating it really quickly. Reaction number one, who remembers, was?
No thanks.
No, thank you. Change? We don't want change. We are afraid of change. If you want us to change, we're gonna go into our shell more and more and more and more, and we're gonna remain exactly the way we are. Do not touch us. We don't want anything to change. And this notion continues pretty much until this very day. Don't touch us. We don't want anything to change. It doesn't matter if we live in North America or in the Jewish state of Israel. Change is not something we're interested in. And this is the birth of ultra-Orthodox Judaism that wants to keep things exactly the way it used to be since the beginning of times. Reaction number two is the complete opposite, which is complete assimilation. Complete assimilation. You want us to be like you? Finally, for 2,000 years, we wanted to become just like everybody else. This is a golden opportunity. We're going to grasp it with everything that we have. We don't want to even remember that we are Jewish. We want to be only French, only German, only Italian, only Polish, only Russians, and so on and so forth. Complete and utter assimilation. Everything okay?
Yeah, I'm just gonna pass this.
So that's the complete opposite. The third reaction says, I like this idea, but if I'm gonna be like my French, German, Italian, and so on neighbor, then I wanna be like him in my own way. What does that mean? You have a country, I'm gonna have a country. You have a flag, I'm gonna have a flag. You have an anthem, I'm gonna have an anthem. You have a language, I'm gonna have a language. We want this eventually? What?
Oh, this is it, right? Isn't this your
Yeah.
presentation? No?
No, the next one.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Are you getting the wrong that far on the top?
Here we are. Sorry. No,
Maybe I picked the wrong window.
no, right? Here we are.
It looked the same.
Okay. So that reaction basically led to the birth of Zionism and eventually nationalist movement and the establishment of the state of Israel. And then the fourth reaction, by the way, there were more than four. There were more than four. These are like the major four, but there were more than four, and we'll get to it in a little bit. So the last one, kind of out of these four, is the people that said, we want to be just like everybody else. We want to dress like our neighbors. We want to eat like our neighbors. We want to go to the same theater and to the opera, and we want to have the same professions and everything. And everything was wonderful until my neighbor, who I now want to resemble to on a Sunday, is going to church. And me, the Jew who really wants to be French, German, and Italian, this is my red line. I want to do everything like the neighbor, but I am not going to any church. And then the question rose as, okay, so if I'm not going to the church, so how will I resemble the neighbor? And the solution to this question was that they're going to church, we're going to be exactly like them. But instead of going to church on Sunday, we're going to the synagogue on a Saturday. And of course, everything that comes with it. And this is when, for the first time really in our history, Judaism is being defined by ourselves and others, by the way, as a religion. Because I am now the Italian, the French, the German. I am different from my Italian, German, French neighbor only by one thing, and that is my religion. And we also said that gave birth to Reform Judaism in Germany, and Reform Judaism immigrated to the United States of America and became even more reformed, and eventually became what it is today.
And the temples and churches even looked a lot alike.
100%.
If you walked into one and you didn't know the difference, it still looked like either a church or temple.
Right. Steve is saying that the churches and the temples looked alike. Maybe not right now, because if we're gonna go this segue, we're definitely not gonna get to America today. But maybe the next course, if we're interested, we can explore the history of the Reform movement, which is really fascinating. So, but that's a completely different course.
That would be a fun course.
Because really, if we're gonna segue this right now. All right, I just want to mention something really important before I'm going to the next slide. Everything that we just described, this is happening in Central and Western Europe. And this is really, really, really important, because Europe at the 18th century and the 19th century, it's not all one, like it is not all one today. So it's really, really important to remember, because most of us are not coming from Central Europe. Most of us, can we hear some ancestral countries that we're coming from?
Ukraine. Russia.
Poland, Ukraine, Russia,
Poland.
Hungary. Hungary?
Yeah.
I did not know.
That's,
Huh?
that's cool.
Yeah.
Poland.
Poland,
Lithuania.
Lithuania. Friends at home, other countries that we didn't mention that your ancestors are coming from? Are they there, Lisa? What did you do with that?
What happened? Oh, other than, hold on.
Lithuania.
Lithuania, thank you. So as I'm saying, we are not
Russia.
from where?
Russia.
Russia?
Yes, Russia.
Jill
U-
said right.
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Another Ukraine.
Yeah. So as I'm saying, evidently, we are not from Western Europe. All right. So it's important to remember that everything we just described, that was true to Western Europe. The place where we are from looked a little bit different. And that is, of course, this is just a nice image of Napoleon and the emancipation and everything that followed. let's look at what happened at the same time, or actually a little bit later, in Eastern Europe. First of all, we're talking about the largest empire in Eastern Europe under the Tsar, which controlled the region for over 300 years. By the way, there's this amazing TV shows, 4 or 5 maybe chapters on Netflix. I don't remember what's it called, but it's about the Romanov family of the Tsar, all the way until the revolution, including what happens to them at the end, which is very, very sad. And it's just absolutely excellent if you want to learn about kind of
Is it a
that time.
documentary or no, it's a,
It's
film.
it's not a documentary, but it's totally based on
Yeah.
facts. I think it's like 4 or 5 chapters.
Yeah.
I think it's called The Tsar or something like that. I remember somebody told me to watch it and I watched it and it was like, wow. So that's the largest empire under the Tsar. And Jewish people could not live wherever they wanted. So I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of the Pale of the Settlement, which basically had 4 countries kind of part of this Pale of Settlement, parts of Lithuania, parts of Ukraine, parts of Belarus, and parts of Russia, but very particular parts. We could not choose those parts. And actually, for all of you and all of our friends at home that are saying that your ancestors are from Russia, I encourage you to put a question mark over there. Because very often we kind of color this whole big chunk of land as Russia, where in fact, up until 1905, Jewish people were not allowed to be in Russia proper. So for many of you, if you think that your families are coming from Russia, there's a very high chance that they're really coming from the Pale of the Settlement, so Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, and so on. And by the way, even in the modern time, it all gets confused. I think until, unfortunately, the current war between Russia and Ukraine, most of people in the world did not understand the difference. And there are differences, definitely historical differences. So the Pale of the Settlement, and most of the Jews lived in those pales, in the Pale of the Settlement.
That means pale.
It means a piece of land that was,
Is that a Russian word, or
huh?
Is that a Russian word? Or
I think it's English word.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
It
never
was,
understood.
it was only after hearing that, I heard that last year, the Pale of Settlement, that I understood the cliche or the phrase beyond the pale.
Oh, interesting.
Because people are living beyond the pale,
Ah.
but not in that Pale of Settlement, yeah.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's not a word that is being used in the local languages that I speak some. And it's really just a territory that was given by the Tsar in the midst of the Tsarist kind of land. And that was given for the Jews to live on. And most of the Jews lived there with some minor exceptions. And most of them lived in poverty and not in the best of conditions, to say the least. And again, up until 1905, they were not allowed to live in Russia proper, mainly the big cities, which is Moscow and St. Petersburg. For example, I was born in Moscow. My parents were born in Moscow, but 3 of my grandparents were not. Only the youngest of the 4 grandparents of my own was born in 1929. So she was born in Moscow. But everybody else were born either in Ukraine or Belarus, and they kind of immigrated to Moscow later on, all in different time. But that is a story which is very, very common for most people. Another component, of course, is discrimination and persecution. And when we get to the 19th century, then we also see a lot of pogroms. I'm sure you heard about Kishinev. I think we will mention here in a minute, but there were also others. So no doubt, at the end of the 19th century, even before the revolution, but when it was allowed to live, did you watch Fiddler on the Roof?
Ah,
Anytime.
So the story that happens at Fiddler on the Roof, kind of towards the end, right? That it's clear and they're all leaving. So this is exactly what is happening. So if you look at the dates between 1881 and 1914, which is kind of before even the big revolution and before Soviet Union was established, 1917, but already we have a big flow of Jewish people leaving. the Pale of the Settlement and kind of that part of the continent altogether. And notice that most of them are coming to this country. Very, very few are inspired by the early Zionist ideas and going to what was then called Palestine. The vast majority of those Jews are coming over here. So this can be, if you like, reaction number 5, kind of to add to the conversation. And then, of course, 1917 is the Bolshevik Revolution. The family of the Tsar is basically being executed. And it is the beginning of the Soviet Union. 15 countries that were independent countries in one way or another become part of this concept of the Soviet Union for almost the entire length of the 20th century until 1991. Supposedly, under the Soviet Union, the Jews finally become emancipated in Eastern Europe. I say supposedly because on one end, we can say, yes, they could be mobile and they could go physically to anywhere they wanted, which is true. Jewish people were allowed to Moscow and St. Petersburg and truly wherever they wanted on the European continent of this kind of part. But it's not like they were equal citizens, and persecution and anti-Semitism was a big, big, big part of being a Jew in the Soviet Union. So it's not as nice as it sounds. Just to put us a little bit really kind of on the map. So all of this was part of the Tsarist Russian Empire, all the way from the Baltic Sea at the northwest to the Black Sea at the south east. You can see a little bit of the borders, Austro-Hungary, that used to be one and then split up at the southwest, bordering Romania, German on the northwestern side, and then everything else was really part of. So everything that you see in this color, which is kind of, how will we call it, grayish, okay? This is the Pale of the Settlement. And you can see that Russia, for example, that is kind of above and around it, that's already was Russia, and Jews were not allowed there until 1917. So maybe some of the cities that you heard growing up from your ancestors are here. The big ones in the Ukrainian part right over here. So Odessa, Kherson, Berdichev, Kamenets-Podolsk, Kiev, Zhytomyr, Chernigov, big cities where Jewish people lived inside of the Ukrainian piece of the Pale of the Settlement. Kishinev, which used to be part of Romania, then became part of Moldova under the Soviet Union. And then on this side over here, it used to be Belarusia. Now some of the cities on this map are in Poland. For example, Lublin, Kielce, Lodz, Warsaw. This was all Poland, but Poland was kind of shifting gears a lot of times. And the northern piece, that's Lithuania, Vilna, Kovna, Vitebsk, and in the middle kind of here, Belarusia, Minsk, Gomel, Bobruisk. So all of those cities were part of the Pale of the Settlement. Any thoughts or questions on that? Cool. Okay. So we mentioned pogroms, so a few illustrations and just a piece of a very, very long poem by Chaim Nachman Bialik, who was himself part of the Pale of the Settlement, and eventually he immigrated from Odessa in Ukraine to Israel and became the national poet of the younger Israel, its pre-statehood. And he wrote this very, very long and famous poem in 1903, following the big massacre, the big pogrom in Kishinev. And he called it In the City of the Slaughter. Would anybody like to read?
Okay,
Okay.
Go, Lori.
arise and go now to the city of slaughter. Into its courtyard, wind your way. With your own hand touch it, with your own eyes see it. Behold on tree, on stone, on fence, on mural clay. The spattered blood and dried brains of the dead. Proceed then to the ruins, the split walls reach, where broken the hollow and greater grows the breach. Pass over the shattered hearth, attain the broken wall, whose burnt and barren brick, whose charred stones reveal the open mouths of such wounds that no mending shall ever mend, no healing ever heal.
Good job.
Thank you. For those of you who were here when we did the Vigil for Israel on October 10th, I started my words with this poem that was written 120 years ago. Another illustration of the pogrom. By the way, again, going back to Fiddler on the Roof, there was a scene, if you remember, in the movie also about a pogrom before everybody are leaving.
I have a bit of a tangent. I've noticed from, you include a lot of poetry in your sermons, your drashes, whatever. And in reading the book, Gordis's book, he talks about all these poets. And why it seems like poetry seems to be a natural reaction. Maybe that's, I don't know if that's a tangent for now, but I was curious because it just, you know, something happens and somebody writes a poem. It just seems to be
Why is it a tension?
a tangent.
Ah, tangent.
I didn't wanna
heard
take-
tension.
No, well, I mean, I didn't want to take us off, but
Yeah.
I want to ask because it seems to.
Next class, a poetry class, history through poetry. I'll just say that I don't write poetry. I do read a lot of poetry and I'm a big fan of this genre. I feel that, I mean, for me, as somebody who doesn't write, and it's very, very different, I feel like when I don't have words to express what I want, then I know that I can trust certain people and explore for others that can kind of give a voice to a lot of what it's not even thinking, it's really what I'm feeling. So maybe for some people it's like that. And for people that are really, really, I guess it's spiritual and inspired and artistic, this is just a way to express themselves. Some people express themselves by speaking. I'm definitely on that side. And some people express themselves in writing, whether it's a novel or a poem, but I feel it's a very powerful kind of gift to give voice to feelings, especially in situations that we feel like we don't have enough language or enough words to describe the audacity of what is happening, good or bad, by the way. I mean, right? The most beautiful love poems, right, are written by a lot of feelings of love. So it's not only war, but. Okay.
No, but it's not a
Uh,
special Israeli kind of thing.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, but I knew you were gonna say that because, yeah, I also noticed that in that book, there's a lot of quotes and a lot of poems, yeah. Daniel Gordis and I don't think alike on many things, but we have that in common. Moving forward, national anti-Semitism. So we talked about different kind of genres of anti-Semitism. So another one is national anti-Semitism, and that is a direct reaction of the emancipation. Again, first in Western Europe and then also in Eastern Europe. It's a very simple story. Up until now, Jewish people were second-class citizens. They were not like everybody else. It means that we're living in different places, and it definitely means that they were doing different types of professions, different types of jobs. What emancipation allowed the Jewish people is to go up from the bottom of the society to full equality. So those who used to be street cleaners now can be professors or conductors or doctors or teachers in universities and whatnot. And they're taking spaces of professional occupation. And for the local society that is absolutely not used to that, and is used to viewing the Jews as second-class citizens, if citizens at all, for so many, many generations, this was really bizarre. And that created a notion and a lot of negative feelings that eventually brought up this genre of national anti-Semitism. And I think it's really important to understand because in a little bit, when we get to Hitler in the 20th century, we always think that Hitler came up with all of these ideas. No, he did not come up with anything. Almost every single thing that he did, somebody else thought about it ahead of him. And people practiced it for many, many years, whether it's living in concentrated areas like the ghettos, whether it's the yellow star or yellow circle, if you remember, we talked about it last time, or having these feelings that we don't want to be equal with the Jews. We are superior and the Jews are our servants. So all of those feelings already existed, and this kind of elevates us to the next level that Jewish people were happy to be equal, but the neighbors did not really want them to be equal. That's not something that they wanted as a fact, and that definitely became a threat to the Jewish society going forward. I want to talk for a minute about a document that came out in 1905 in Russia that is called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. For how many of you is the first time you hear about this? Good, all right. So it came up in the form of a book, almost like a fable, that brought up a lot of mythological ideas about the Jews. Remember what we started from, saying that everything that kind of fed feelings of anti-Semitism from the very beginning, it was never based on any facts. It was always fed by rumors, by myths, by stories, and this is the most classical and probably the most famous example of the 20th century. In 1905, a book comes out talking about a secret Jewish plot by a secret police in Russia who wanted to believe that the anti-Tsarist revolutionaries were controlled by the Jews. Notice the year, 1905 is the first revolution, Ludwig did the second one. The Tsarist kind of empire is going down. And those who were opposing the climate, the political climate, wanted to make everybody believe that, of course, the Jews are behind it. So they come up with this book and they describe in details about this plot that the Jewish people are doing, leading everybody against the Tsar. There's absolutely no truth to anything that is written in that book, but it was too little too late and it became published and it dispersed around the world. And it truly became one of the most, unfortunately, shameful but meaningful documents to tell myths about the Jews and to increase persecution and feelings of hatred and so on. To such an extent, I tried to connect it a little bit to this country, which is where we headed. Between 1920 and 1927, Henry Ford published the document in Dearborn Independent, and he called it the Protocols. And it was also highly influential on Hitler and the Third Reich, and was taught in schools in Nazi Germany together with Hitler's Mein Kampf. So kind of merging the ideas. And the protocols really kind of became the foundation for global conspiracy theories and claims about the Jewish people generally, and more so today.
It still pops up today.
Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely.
globalists,
Yeah.
or globalists and.
No, I
cosmopolitans.
mean, the protocols of the
Yeah.
Elder of
Yeah.
Zion
Yeah.
pops up today.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What always intrigues me is really the fact that people don't know that it was kind of a fiction plot book that was written about the Jews by non-Jews. What?
The deep fake.
Yeah, fake news. But most people don't know that, especially with such a name, right? I mean, Protocols of the Elders of Zion sounds like
Sounds
it's
legit.
right. Yeah, it sounds like it was found somewhere in the, I don't know if you know the term Agniza HaKahirit. Gniza is something that we do with Holy Scripture that are no longer kosher. For example, if you will take out the Torah scroll and we'll find out that it has flaws, it will be no kosher to use anymore. So we can either fix it, or if it's unfixable, then we don't use it anymore. But then what do? Is that we cannot just
Very.
put it in the garbage, right? So we bury it, and it's called gniza. So we either bury it, or some synagogues have like a special ark or a special closet or special something, and it's called gniza. And in the 19th century, there's a huge treasure that was found out in Cairo, in Egypt, of a gniza of hundreds of years of old, and it's just a treasure of Jewish history. It's unbelievable what is found there. So and it's a very kind of famous archive. So such a name as Protocols of the Elders of Zion, like for a lot of people, it sounds like it's like a scroll or a book that is taken out of the Geniza in Cairo versus what it really is, which is kind of scary, that it became so powerful and influenced so many people across the globe for the last 100+ years. But it's important for us to know because, as I say all the time, knowledge is power. And the next time we're going to hear somebody use the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, we'll be able to combat that and to say what the truth is. Again, just kind of a few illustrations from the Protocols itself, and one of the covers, it says the word Zion, Zion, in the middle of the Star of David, preface and explanatory notes, like a whole thing about it. Okay. The next level, and again, everything we said up until now feeds the climax, and that is, of course, the racial anti-Semitism. Prejudice or hatred of Jews, putting the Jewish people as a racial group that is perceived to be biological or superior white race, and Hitler has a whole explanation about it in Mein Kampf. First of all, important, of course, we know, but I'll say it anyway, that there's, again, no truth to it whatsoever. If you ever studied the origins of the Nazi ideology, then he describes, including scientists that joined this ideology, they describe kind of the shape of a human face, the lengths between each of the parts in our face, comparing a Jewish face to a non-Jewish face, with, you know, like different tools and whatnot and measurements. And of course, you know, there's no truth to it whatsoever. But that was the centerpiece of this genre of anti-Semitism, putting the Jewish people as a separate race. Again, Hitler did not come up with it by himself. It exists, the theory exists in the world before that, all the way from the 19th century, by the British scientist Charles Darwin, that I'm sure you're familiar with the name. And he published a research that is called The Origin of the Species, and where he kind of laid out his theory of evolution and natural selection, also known as the Darwinism, right? So racist people and anti-Semite people combine the early ideas about racial hierarchies with Darwin's ideas. And it is true both for anti-Semitism and racism in terms of people of color. And Darwin, literally as a scientist, really wanted to base his theory on biological and natural kind of components of human body and of human face. So Hitler read Darwin and established his beliefs kind of coming out of that. And again, this is also is a foundation of, although scientific mythology, but nevertheless, there is no truth to that. There's nothing factual in that. Remember that because it would also become relevant in this country, but we'll get there soon. Something that I think I said from the very beginning, but kind of now it's official because we got to the time in history where it actually came to be, and that is the term anti-Semitism. And I think I said it last time that the term anti-Semitism, the term itself is a modern term. In history, there was no such thing called anti-Semitism. There was always the sentiment of hatred toward the Jews and laws against the Jews and everything that came with it. But the term itself, the way we know it today, only came to be in 1862 by a gentleman called Marr, who was talking about hierarchy of races. This is a continuation of the genre of racist anti-Semitism. And he was comparing white Europeans and Aryans to the alien race of the Jews. And according to this theory, Jewish people are born different. They could never assimilate to any society because we are born different because our race is different. The ideas, of course, have never been true, but he is the one that came with the term anti-Semitism. You can see his book on the left called The Patriarch of Anti-Semitism. This is how he looked like, a little caricature in the middle. So he is the one that brought our world the sentiment of anti-Semitism. By the way, there's been a big debate if it should be hyphened or not hyphened, and the latest decision, definitely in English in North America, is just to write it like this in one word, not hyphened.
Just to clarify.
Yeah.
Darwin didn't say anything about Jews or black or anything. Even about people. The anti-Semites or racists or whatever are taking the ideas of the evolution and twisting it into this. So I don't want us to think that, that Darwin said that, Jews are.
No, that he did
No.
not say, but he kind of laid out the foundation from which Hitler took and dressed it on Aryans and the Jews.
Right, but that wasn't that's not what Darwin is doing, so.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that was not the intention, but that's what it became. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. It's important. Okay. We're almost at the end of our first session. Go ahead.
When they were using the word anti-Semitism, were they referring to the region of the world, Middle East, essentially?
This guy?
Yeah.
No, when he was referring to anti-Semitism, he was already referring anti-Jews, which is really interesting, right? Because like using the language,
Semitic.
exactly,
He's dressing up.
exactly.
He's dressing it up. Instead of
Yeah.
saying anti-Jew, he's making it sound more scientific, more acceptable,
Yeah.
whatever.
But it's true, because we talked about it last time also that Semites, we are not only the Jewish people. There are other groups, families of people in the world that are Semites.
Yeah, but
But-
this applies only. to
Yes, when he determines this term, it's anti-Jews, it's not all Semitic families. We know about the Nazi racial theory of the Jews. Nazis believed, Hitler believed that the Jewish people are like cancer in the throat of humanity. He writes it very clear
Oh, yeah,
in
yeah.
Mein Kampf, which translated into My Struggle. He believed that when he will get rid of the Jewish people, he will do the world a favor. He was saying that we are making the world filthy, and therefore he is cleaning up the world by getting rid of us. At certain point, he also needed to decide who comes into the category of who is a Jew. And the definition comes from him, not from us. And that is done under the Nuremberg laws in 1935 in the city of Nuremberg. There were several kind of components to the Nuremberg laws, but the most important one was that the definition of who is a Jew was somebody who has one of four grandparents who is Jewish. So not father, not mother, not all grandparents, one grandfather who is Jewish. It made a person Jewish, and that meant a death sentence. And if you look kind of at this chart that became very, very famous, then it really kind of describes. So this is a Jew. All the black circles are Jewish. So 4 grandparents, 2 parents, that's a Jewish person, 3 grandparents, Jewish person, 2 grandparents, that's at the top, Jewish, 1 grandparent, also Jewish. Mischling, the headline at the top, is a result of a mixed marriage. Also Jewish because it falls into the definition of 1 or more grandparents. And only here, when you look at 4 circles at the top, and they're white, then the headline at the top says Deutsche, which means German or Aryan. So he creates this definition, just as a side note, one of the first laws that were created in the state of Israel by David Ben-Gurion, completely in a non-Orthodox fashion, is the law of return, which says the exact opposite of the Nuremberg laws. Every single person who has one Jewish grandparent is entitled to come to Israel and to become an Israeli citizen the minute they get off their airplane, out of the notion that Hitler wanted to kill every single person that had one Jewish grandfather, and we will hug and accept every single person who has a Jewish grandfather. Later on, and until today, unfortunately, it collided multiple times with the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate that thinks very differently from that, but that's for a different class. Okay, and then kind of as a segue, as a bridge to racial anti-Semitism in the United States. So Jewish people immigrated in massive numbers. Close to 3 million Jews left the European continent at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and most of them ended up here. So let's put it in a simple way. When the Jewish people in Europe were in a crossroads, especially in Eastern Europe, some in Central Europe, but the massive numbers came from Eastern Europe. When they understood that it's not a good idea to stay where they were because of everything that was going on, they needed to make a decision to stay or to leave. Clearly, not everybody chose to leave, right? A lot of people chose to stay, and we know what happened to most of them. Those who made the decision to leave needed to make another decision, and they were standing at a crossroads. And the decision that was needed to be made is where to? At that point, the options that were available was this country, Palestine, a little bit South America, a very, very little bit Australia, a very, very little bit South Africa. But the vast majority of those who chose to leave came here. And that's a very, very important component to remember. And of course, as we know, and we've seen it up until now, wherever the Jewish people went, the tourists went with them. And therefore, it also arrived over here. By the way, I think it's really interesting that the only non-American in the room is going to teach
No,
about what?
He's not a,
You're not a citizen?
well, he is a citizen.
I am not.
Oh,
So I'm saying, for the only non-American in the room, to teach about anti-Semitism in America, so it's interesting. And I must say that I read a lot to prepare for the session, and I was surprised a lot because I definitely did not know a lot of the things that I discovered, and I was kind of blown away. Because for the regular kind of European person or outsider, the America viewed as the golden Medina, right? As the land of all opportunities. And for a person that doesn't know, and I don't see myself as an ignorant person, but I was definitely ignorant on this topic. I knew some over the years, but definitely not to the extent of what we're going to see now. It's very, very sad and surprising, maybe even shocking, that basically everything that was going on all over the world also came here. But on the other hand, again, wherever the Jewish people go, then it's kind of what?
We bring our generational.
Yeah.
trauma with us.
Yeah.
Well, you also have to think that people from all over the world are coming here
True.
too, so they're
Yeah,
bringing
for
all
sure.
their prejudices. and
Yeah.
everything else. Yeah.
My grandparents always used to say, the best place for the Jewish person to be is on the way. That was the mantra. Yeah. Together with the grass is always greener, and it is the best where we are not there. Wherever we are not there, it's the best there. But the concept of the wandering Jew, they would always tell me, for the Jewish person, the best is to be on the way. So we were on the way and we arrived to this country, starting with 1880s and kind of following. Just kind of to wrap up the European chapter, and then we'll really segue. But one of the interesting things is the Immigration Act that was passed in the Congress in 1924, which explicitly aimed to exclude the Eastern European Jews. And also, here, by the way, other people are also coming, Southern Italian Catholics, in addition to other non-white ethnic groups. And you, I'm sure, know, but I learned now, the famous speech of Senator Ellison Durant shut the door. Anybody would like to read? Please, Nancy.
Who is an American? Is he an immigrant from Italy? Is he an immigrant from Germany? If you were to go abroad and someone were to meet you and say, I met a typical American, what would flash into your mind as a typical American? The typical representative of that new nation? Would it be the son of an Italian immigrant, the son of a German immigrant, the son of any of the breeds from the Orient, the son of the denizens of Africa? We must not get our ethnological distinctions mixed up with our anthropological distinctions. It is the breed of the dog in which I am interested. I'm just reading these. I would like for the members of the Senate to read that book just recently published by Madison Grant, The Passing of a Great Race. Thank God we have in America perhaps the largest percentage of any country in the world of the pure, unadulterated Anglo-Saxon stock, certainly the greatest of any nation in the Nordic breed. It is for the preservation of that splendid stock that has characterized us that I would make this not an asylum for the oppressed of all countries, but a country to assimilate and perfect that splendid type of manhood that has made America the foremost nation in her progress and her power, and yet the youngest of all nations. I myself believe that the preservation of her institutions depends upon us now taking counsel with our condition and our experience during the last World War.
Things never change,
No.
do they?
Well, I practice.
You could take some of that
Yeah,
and just use
absolutely.
it now. can't
Yeah,
you?
yep.
All right, let's pause just for a minute. We're not gonna go to a deep dive right now, but any thoughts? Our next chapter is really about anti-Semitism in North America. In order to get to anti-Semitism, we'll need to do a crash course in in the history of the Jewish community in North America. It's not going to be in detail, and I'm sure it's everything that you already know, but sort of get us up to speed to the same page. So just before we go there, something that you want to say, share, ask, comments, something that you're not comfortable with, anything. People at home, please notify Lisa and participate. We want to hear you. Go ahead.
Well, Durant was way ahead of Hitler.
Durant was way ahead of Hitler, yes.
He not only hated Jews, he hated Catholics, Blacks, anybody who is not Nordic.
By the way, Hitler also not only hated the Jews.
Yeah, he hated the gypsies also,
And a few other people as well, but
the homosexuals, right.
If there had been a large Black population in Germany, that probably would have been.
100%, 100%. I'm gonna close it for a minute, just so we can see if somebody is still with us. Hello. Thoughts, comments, questions, reactions? Rami, ladies first. Myron, you're next.
Rabbi Lana, the thing that really stands out for me is Henry Ford. My mother and my mother's family happened to have been French Canadians that immigrated to Michigan. And the influence throughout the Midwest of Henry Ford with anti-Semitism is unbelievable. Plus Father Coughlin, who was a Catholic priest. And the publications, the radio programs, the speeches, the stumping, just like a movement to keep people out was unbelievable. And it started really early. Like it started even maybe around before the First World War, and then kept going. But it really, really, it gave rise to McCarthyism, ultimately, in Wisconsin. So I just think it's, even though the United States might have been seen as the golden land, it certainly was not.
Thank you. Myron?
It's just interesting in the continuity and stability of the notion of inferiority, which is not only relates to Jews, but other people who have been scapegoated throughout history. They come up with a rationale to demonstrate the inferiority of people.
Yep. I don't have anything to add, but to agree. Other thoughts, questions?
Who was the president at that time of the United States?
I'm not gonna fail that quiz.
Yeah.
Which time?
1880s?
Because,
Oh, no.
I
not
mean,
that.
I know that after World War II, when the
Ah,
Jews were
after, that's-
escaping and coming,
yeah.
Roosevelt turned the boats away. We didn't let them.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Oh, okay, okay, I'm jumping the gun. But I was
That's an
wondering-
important piece.
I think it was spoiler alert.
Well, because, I should know.
We'll get to the boat, yes.
Born and raised here, and I don't.
Wilson was during World War One,
One,
and after
yeah.
Wilson was it Coolidge?
But-
Hoover
but-
was during
But
the
whoever it
Depression.
was, they were letting them.
Google.
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah, I'll just share really quickly. So,
Sounds right.
when I went to Washington DC 2 weeks ago with Leta Ken, with our teens, and we were really a small group, and there were 400 teens from across the country in many different communities and congregations and whatever. And one of the kind of peak moments of the entire weekend was Havdalah ceremony at the Jefferson's memorial. We were sitting on the steps, and I think it was Andrew, our youth coordinator, who is absolutely fabulous. Since I don't know anything and he's teaching me. No, I mean it, not sarcastically, really. American history, I don't know. I know some, not in details. I know more now, thank you. But he was telling me that Jefferson had slaves of his own. And then sort of when they did Havdalah between the different blessings, whoever was speaking, were trying to bring in beautiful Jeffersonian, they call it, ideas to inspire the kids. And then as we're going up, then one other participant of ours is telling me that he wrote the principles for the Declaration of Independence and stuff like that. And that he was, and then when you go up to the memorial, right, there are quotes of him kind of on the walls around, and most of them are talking against slavery. And I was like,
Okay, are you talking about Lincoln or are you talking about
No,
Jefferson?
Jefferson.
Because you said you were sitting at the Lincoln.
No, no, Jefferson. Jefferson. No, no, no.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the quotes and it's like, doesn't click. It's like how all the quotes are talking about freedom and equality and all of that and against slavery, and he himself has slaves. So as we're coming down, I'm asking Andrews, like, maybe I'm missing something. Clearly I'm missing something. What are we teaching exactly? Like, what is the role model that we're educating these kids, that we came to do this magical ceremony on the steps of his memorial and to teach about values of social justice and freedom of a person that had slaves and kind of encourage it. Anyway, it became a theme of adult theme of the weekend. And then we were like looking at the internet and whatever, and then somebody said, I don't remember the exact quote, but something along the lines of his minds or his words were bigger than what his actions could be, or something like that. I did not settle for that, but it's just interesting. It's just, anyway, yeah.
Racism was part of the Constitution. A black person vote was only worth.
No, not he couldn't vote. He was,
I thought it was 3/5.
yes,
of
but
a
it
white
was
person.
not a vote. It was just counting in the population.
Oh, a count. All right,
Vote
so
was
It was
in the
built in.
sixties.
Anyway, I think it's interesting to look at foundational values 150 years or so afterwards. Anyway, are you ready for part 2?
You're not sharing with the crowd at home.
I am not sharing. I had no
Oh,
intention to do that. I'm sorry.
We want to see too.
Thank God for Lisa. Nothing would happen if not Lisa. I'm not kidding. You know that. I'm just talking. Lisa does it all. Okay, hello. Here we are. Lovely. No, move up. What did you do?
Yeah, no, just go down, just go with the mouse down. No, that's not what I meant. Whatever.
Close
Okay.
enough.
Not good?
Put your
with that.
cursor
You're
up,
one-
don't drag it.
You-
Don't drag it, yeah, it'll go away.
You're one,
There you
you're
go.
one
Like
slide
this?
too far, back, I think.
What are you
back.
looking for?
I don't know.
There, there.
Okay. I don't know how much we're gonna get to, but we'll try. And you'll need to remember, because next week you guys are celebrating Valentine's Day. That's why we don't have a class. So we need to remember it until the 21st. Okay. So, Article 4 of the United States Constitution promised that religious tests were not to be used in elections to any American office or public trust. And following that, President Washington expressed actually a warm welcome to American Jews in this famous letter. Actually, who've been in that synagogue in Rhode Island? They have the letter in a frame. It's actually quite moving. Daniel and I spent our first anniversary in Rhode Island, and we went to the synagogue. It was really nice. But anyway, in this famous letter, he promises the Jewish community that he will protect them and there will be no persecution, and he will not give a hand to any of that. And at the very beginning, it looked promising, like it's the Milky Way to the Golden Medina, and everything will be well. But of course, as you know better than me, it was not exactly the case. 1791, the US Bill of Rights was approved. First Amendment prohibited government from impeding freedom of religion or making any law respecting the establishment of religion. At the same time, individual states maintained the right to impose limitations on the rights of religious minority. And some did so for decades. And again, it's not only about the Jews, because other people are coming too. So it's against the Jews and the Catholics and the Mormons, the atheists and the Muslim. And that was a general notion. American anti-Semitism did not emerge in a vacuum. Clearly, when there was no Jewish community, there was no anti-Semitism. But now we have arrived. And so racial hegemony that enslaved and discriminated against Black Americans, other minorities, and Jews found themselves fitting into that circle of being a minority. The history of Jews in America is a history of ongoing negotiation between freedoms and lingering social effects of racial and religious prejudice as it persists and reunites in this country. By the way, something that I learned from experience about a year and a half ago, a little bit more, when I led a trip of African-American social justice leaders to Israel on an Israel-Palestine seminar, that it was very, very hard for them. And one day we were visiting the president of Israel, who was giving them the official spiel of the kind of, I want to say elected official, or he's not even that, but he is like the figure, the representative figure. And they came out of there so angry. And it took me a lot of time to understand what are they angry about. And what I learned is that in this country, and again, you know, it's better than me, the history of African Americans and Jews as two minorities were kind of walking hand in hand for a very, very long time. And of course, the climax of that came through the civil rights movement, but even before and after, and to a certain extent until today. But then they didn't see themselves as a minority, and they come to Israel. And in Israel, the Jewish people are not a minority like they are in North America. And suddenly this group that they are used to seeing as a minority is the hegemonical majority that is mistreating the other minority. And everything is shifting for them. To such an extent, I was leading that trip with the head of our movement, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, and Rabbi Jonah Pesner, who is the head of RAC. And we were absolutely amazed. Every single time we met a Palestinian person who's come to speak with us, they were receiving every single word that that person would say. Whether it was true or not, it completely didn't matter. If we would say something to undermine even the smallest thing, we would be viewed as the bad guys. Whereas when every time a Jewish person would come to speak, an Israeli person, every other word would be screened and kind of negotiated and judged. And it was really, really an interesting kind of experience, a very painful one, but it taught me a lot.
Wow.
And this is really something, you know, the saying, what you see from here, you don't see from there, and vice versa. Because when you are in a country that you are a minority and another group is a minority, you kind of bond together from being a minority, and unfortunately, in this case, also being prosecuted and being the underdog. When you come to a place that your minority group is suddenly the majority, everything shifts, which is a really interesting phenomenon. The first Jews arriving to America in the 17th century, it's a very, very small group, 23 of them only. They're coming from Brazil as refugees following the Portuguese invasion into Brazil, and Brazil becomes a Portuguese.
What's that word after mostly? I can't see.
Where?
Group of 23, mostly.
Spanish, I think.
Sephardi.
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 Okay. That was close. So I'm sure you heard about the Spanish Inquisition and the Portuguese Inquisition. So it's following the same line. Portugal is making Brazil a colony and expelling the Jews. A very, very small group is coming to the northern part of the continent. They were called the Dutch Jews. And the Dutch governor here is in New York, first accepted the Jews with tolerance and even kind of signed a manifesto of rights. But shortly after that started to change. In 1685, the Jewish American community, which was very, very, very little, we're talking about under probably 100 people at that time or something along those lines. They petitioned for the right to worship in public, and they were refused and not allowed to do that by the Common Council. And the reason for declining the request was that they held a different religion and they did not follow Christ. Moving forward, about 100 years later, synagogues were tolerated in the 18th century. And in 1740, we are witnessing laws that include Protestant and Jewish residents, offering Jews a legal status. Moving forward, by the time of the Revolutionary War, we witnessing 5 small Jewish communities on the eastern coast, on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, that are living under these kind of laws of tolerance for their religious freedoms. This is just a map that, of course, you know, the 13 colonies and kind of with the years and where the Jewish people were living. These are the first 5: Newport, New York City, Philly, Charleston, and Savannah, all in the 18th century. And then the picture changes. And why the picture changes? Because the numbers are changing. Up until then, we're talking about something tiny, 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 tiny. They fought for their rights, they received some, they did not receive some, but it was sort of okay. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, we have 200,000 Jewish immigrants arriving to this continent from Central Europe. And that's already after the emancipation and after equality. And they already know sort of how to be equal citizens to everybody else. And they come with that, with a lot of motivations. They are definitely coming to the Golden Medina, or at least this is the concept that they have in their head. They're coming to find economic opportunity, to leave behind whichever anti-Semitic resistance that was limiting them in the old country, and kind of to get advanced professionally, business-wide, and so on. And we should say that by and large, they did find a lot of these things in America. I mean, I don't think it's just a stigma that it's a country of all opportunities, right? A lot of these things did happen, but at the same time, they found themselves not as everybody else. And they become the scapegoat here, just as they were used to being in Europe. And those stereotypes and myths that were flourishing in the European continent for almost 2,000 years are following them into this country as well. During the Civil War, anti-Jewish intolerance is dramatically increased on all sides, with both the Union of Confederacy making baseless accusation that the Jewish people aided the opposing side, and of course, vice versa. So they become the scapegoat for each of the sides. And we see that with newspaper cartoons and all kind of comic illustrations of merchants selling military supplies with artificially high prices, undermining the war effort while making a profit. And similar to what we're going to see, by the way, if this is the 19th century, during the Nazi propaganda in Germany, that will be a tool that will be used. So it's interesting, kind of this flow. So yeah, but
I didn't know that, a lot of this I've known, but I knew, but this with the Civil War, that period, I didn't know that.
I will say,
both sides.
yeah, I want to say it in the beginning and I forgot, specifically about the North American part, because a lot of it is also new to me. I used ADL, Anti-Defamation League, which is an amazing source of information. I think that at this day and age, there are numerous sources of information, and it's really, really hard kind of to find. So for the American chapter, I felt reading a bunch that this is the most kind of, I don't know, if loyal or trustworthy, reliable kind of source of information. So not all of it, but a lot of what I'm using here and kind of the data you can find on their website, which is truly is a wealth of knowledge and information. Moving a little bit forward, General Ulysses Grant issues an order to expel Jews from territory in his command, blaming Jews as a class for smuggling and cotton speculation conducted by a diverse network of people in his region. And after Jewish expulsions in northern Mississippi and Kentucky, President Lincoln, here he is, you knew that we're going to talk about him, learned of Grant's order and put a stop to it, condemning the wronging of an entire group for a behavior of only a few sinners, an interesting shift. Later on, Grant apologized and spent the remainder of his life as a friend of human rights causes, generally, especially those involving the Jews, taking legal steps to protect America's freedom of religion. Moving forward, the picture expands again, and the reason is again the same. This time we're talking about over 2 million.
That's huge.
2 million, mainly Eastern European Jews that are coming to this country in a very short chapter of time, approximately 35 years from the 19th century until the beginning of World War I. Notice the date. By the way, 1881 is the same time when modern immigration to Palestine begins, modern Jewish immigration. It's more or less the same time. Only then we're talking about 20,000 people, and here we're talking about 2 million. I wonder how it would be if it was reverse or more or less equal. but it wasn't, so we're not gonna play the what if game. Again, the reasons of immigration were the same reasons that we saw kind of a generation earlier, only the numbers, of course, are colossal. Most of them entered through Ellis Island, as you know, and probably your family members also went through Ellis Island. A lot of them changed their names, and it's kind of a common story. They also, most of them stayed in New York City just because they came very, very poor and they did not have the means or the funds to travel, and they thought that their skills will allow them to find a job in the big city. So a lot of them remained there, and I believe until today, it's the largest Jewish population in North America. Some Americans looked at Jews as a minority, resented their presence in urban life. Very, very similar to what was happening in Europe after the emancipation. They were expressing discomfort about Jewish immigrants, about the way they were dressed, about their aspirations to succeed in America. Having said that, most of these Jews did acculturate into the American middle class relatively quickly and advance professionally within the urban capitalist landscape. So the story will get much worse, but I think it's important to remember that, again, this concept of the land of all opportunities, definitely for the middle class, it did become a reality, and it became a very, very successful reality. Maybe I'll say something that is not here, and we'll end with that. If we'll take the Reform Jews that immigrated not from Eastern, but from Central and Western Europe, particularly from Germany, when they came here and reformed the Reform movement to what it is today, there were a couple changes, crucial changes that they made in their communal Jewish life that were inspired by these processes. Number one, in traditional Jewish prayer book, there is a lot of time spent on praying for the coming of the Messiah. And when the Messiah will come, what will happen? We will return to the land of Israel. Have you ever seen it in the Reform Siddur? No, you haven't. You know why? Because in Pittsburgh Platform, in the end of the 19th century, the leaders of the Reform movement said, it's irrelevant for us to pray for the coming of the Messiah and going back to the land of Israel. The Messiah is irrelevant to us, and we are not going anywhere because we already have arrived. It's true.
Yeah.
And where have they arrived? Here. Right. This was not a mean to an end. This was the destination. So after they have arrived, whether it was New York, Cincinnati, or Cleveland, Ohio, they were done. And all of their ambitions and all of their efforts and all of their desires went for one goal only, and that was to make it here, to be the middle class, to be the upper middle class, whichever, but to make it. And under that notion, the Messiah, together with the return to the land of Israel, was taken out from the Reform prayer book. The other thing, when your grandparents were going to synagogue in the shtetls or the cities in Eastern Europe, how would they say? I go to shul, which is from which language? Yiddish. It actually means a school in Yiddish, but it doesn't matter. When people said I'm going to shul, I was going to the synagogue. What did it become in America?
Temple.
Why?
Well, my grandparents still called it shul, but yeah.
But you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and why is that?
Sounded more Christian.
Is it?
No,
No.
no.
So the Jews that were praying for the coming of the Messiah
The temple.
and going back to the land of Israel, they were also believing and praying. By the way, it's not in past tense. A lot of Jews still pray and believe until this very day that the Messiah will do what after
Oh,
he will bring us to the land of Israel. He will
The temple.
rebuild the temple. And again, this is the proud moment that I'm happy to say that I have a master's degree in professional Jewish studies from the Spertus University in Chicago. And the course that I did about American Jewish history, I responded exactly the way you are right now. I was like, oh, I never knew that, and it makes perfect sense. Because for those Jews,
This is it.
this was the destination. And same as they did not want to pray for the Messiah or bringing them back to the land of Israel, they definitely did not want to pray for the new temple. One sec, and the choice of remodeling the concept that we are no longer have a need to pray for a temple in Jerusalem because we have a temple and it's down the street. And this is where we're going, and this is our sanctuary. And we're gonna invest our prayers, our funds, our money, our intentions, our volunteering hours, our everything into the temple that is down the street. Because we also want to build community. This is our temple. The temple in Jerusalem is no longer relevant. And you will not find it in the Reformed Prayer Book. Steve, and then Nancy, and then Debbie. Bye.
So two things come to mind. One is in Passover saying that we will return to Jerusalem
Yes.
as being part of the Passover service.
Mm-hmm.
And the other that I'm offended by is the word diaspora, meaning that we're doing it wrong. And unless we're living in Israel, they're doing it right.
Okay, so two things. Jerusalem, the fact that we pray for Jerusalem, it's not connected to what I said before. We pray to be in Jerusalem because Jerusalem, and you can disagree, that's the way I see it, is core to who we are as a people. Why? Because if you would ask a Jewish person 300 years ago, what does it mean to be Jewish? The answer that you're gonna get is being Jewish is being part of a particular group of people. And that group of people have things in common. And one of the things that is in common is a land. And in the heart of that land is Jerusalem. And there's a reason why for 2000 years, when we pray, especially in America, I like insisted with Andrew when he's teaching our religious school, and when he tells him to get up for Baruch or for Amidah, and he's telling him turn east. And I was like, please, don't tell them to turn east, because east is not a place. Jewish people don't pray to the east. We pray towards Jerusalem. In California, it happens to be east. In other places in the world, it's a different direction, but that's not the point. We are praying towards Jerusalem for 2000 years. And yes, we celebrate Passover and we're still dreaming about Jerusalem. For Orthodox Jews, they're praying for the return to Jerusalem with the Messiah and everything that comes with that. For you, you need to come up what it means to you. But it's still, I want to believe, a core piece of our Jewish identity, even as a Reformed Jews, not in the same connotation, but different. About the second thing, and the diaspora, the next course we're going to do, I'm already planning.
Good.
Will be about the relationship in history and today between the Jews in the land of Israel and the Jews all over the world. And the term that was used for many, many, many years, which is diaspora, luckily, have changed over the course of the last decades. And it's no longer called like that. And there are historical and sociological kind of processes that kind of went with it and made it what it is today. So we'll explore it in the next course.
Good.
So you're talking about the word temple.
Yes,
Okay. It's a shul. So I.
in
tend-
English, of
In
course.
English, yeah. I tend to use the word temple and synagogue interchangeably.
That's gonna be my question.
Well, there you go.
Beautiful.
Temple and synagogue interchangeably.
Beautiful.
And I tend to lean more towards synagogue because
Right.
other religions also have temples.
Ah,
Right,
that's
so when you say
interesting.
you're going to temple, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to, I mean, people look at me,
Beautiful.
they.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
but do they
yeah.
mean the same thing?
Okay,
or-
great. Beautiful question. So synagogue. Same question?
Yeah, same question.
Really? Great minds think alike. Synagogue is actually a Greek word, synagoga. And what it actually means is to come together. How do you say synagogue in Hebrew? The word synagogue. In modern Hebrew language, how do you say?
Synagogue.
In Hebrew?
Don't know.
Beit
Temple.
Knesset.
Knesset.
What is it? Beit is a house. What is Knesset?
Community, like not
Yeah.
together, yeah.
To come together. See, the first synagogues that we know of take us back approximately to the 2nd century before the Common Era in the land of Israel, at the same time that we had the temple, Beit HaMikdash. And those synagogues were not used as a house of worship. They were used as a house of gathering. They were like the JCC of today. It was really to bring people together. Only after the destruction of the temple, the synagogue, the Beit Knesset, became not only a house of gathering, but also a house of worship. And so the word synagogue or Beit Knesset still uses this form of community. You're coming together. You also pray sometimes, not all the times, right? You come here very often and you not necessarily always pray, right? Temple is a very particular American reform movement term. It actually was used even before that in Europe. There were several reform temples in several places in Europe as the reform movement was kind of emerging. Although they were still praying for the coming of the Messiah, the return to the land of Israel and the new temple. But the idea of, I'm not praying for the return, I'm praying for Jerusalem, but I'm not praying to return to the land of Israel as an ultimate destination. And I don't need the Messiah to bring me there. I can buy my own ticket to the plane, go in and go out. And I have no need in a temple because it's completely irrelevant to my life. I don't want to go back to this time when you put animals and sacrifice them and all of that. This is like gazillion of years from me. It's not part of my Judaism. I replaced that Judaism with prayer. We now pray instead of doing these barbaric practices that used to be done in the temple. So it's a term that was really invented by the Reform movement, and it became what it became with the Jews that came.
So
Here.
for Reform Jews, synagogue and temple is interchangeable.
It is.
But if you're an, excuse my ignorance, if you're an Orthodox Jew in America, do you say you're going to the synagogue?
You will say either synagogue or shul, but the
You don't-
Orthodox
you don't
Jews will not say
Say they're
temple.
going to temple, okay.
No, because even in the North American Jewish Orthodox rhetorics, when you say temple, there's only one temple, and that is Jerusalem, whether it's the one that was or the one that will be. There is no other temple. And by the way, which other way we call synagogue or temple or shul post temple period? A synagogue is Migdash Me'at. So the temple in the Hebrew language is Beit HaMikdash. Migdash comes from the word kadosh, which means a holy place, right? So it's a place of holiness. And the synagogues are Migdash Me'at. It's like a mini holy place. And when the Messiah will come, and we will again have the holy place, we will not need the mini holy places because we're all going to pray there like it used to be thousands of years ago. You notice how it's completely different theology?
So what do Reform Jews in Israel call where they get together?
Bet Knesset.
Oh, so you say you're going to the Beit Knesset?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we spent the last 30 years at, a couple of conservative synagogues, and I found that they didn't use the word temple.
No, right, because it's not a conservative word.
Yeah.
And the conservative Jews, if you open up a prayer book, are praying for the coming of the Messiah and returning to the land of Israel and building a new temple.
Oh.
And that's a big difference between conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism.
I have to retrain my mouth
Yeah,
to say.
no,
temple.
no. But it's a big concept to kind of to grasp that the word temple was created by Reform Jews in America intentionally. There's a reason behind it. It's not just a word. It erases a huge fundamental concept in Judaism. That is still a very big piece of Orthodox Judaism and conservative Judaism, but not Reform Judaism. Any remarks, questions from folks at home? Those who are still with us. All right, try not to forget everything until the 21st. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank
Happy
you very much.
Valentine's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.